Ubisoft just announced their next big Assassin's Creed game, and it's what longtime fans have been waiting for since near the very beginning when we were all introduced to Altair, eagle diving into a heap of hay. That's right, Assassin's Creed Shadows will be set in feudal Japan. In retrospect, with the romanticized illustrations of shinobi and samurai, it seems like an obvious place to take the franchise to, particularly when other critically acclaimed games and media shared a similar Japanese setting. But a lot of people are actually angry about this upcoming Assassin's Creed game. Why? Because one of the playable protagonists is Yasuke, an African man in traditional samurai armor, featured alongside Naoe, a Japanese woman who is a ninja from the Iga province, well known for its shinobi history. But an African man in feudal Japan? Have game developers gone woke, as the angry people say? Is this not disrespectful of Japanese people and their culture? Why didn't they just make an African Assassin's Creed game? For a lot of people unfamiliar with this piece of history, yes, there actually was an African man who entered into the service of the famed daimyo Oda Nobunaga in the late 16th century. And yes, many Japanese people who are confused over why so many non-Japanese people are freaking out over this African samurai know about Yasuke. In fact, there are entire films, games, comics, and art pieces from Japan that depict Yasuke, but perhaps Oda Nobunaga was ahead of the curve and really did onboard him as a DEI hire. Joking aside, before I tackle the topic of Yasuke as a historian, I want to address the thousands of angry comments remarking on the historical accuracy or authenticity or lack of in Assassin's Creed Shadows or really any of the other games. For those of you who aren't familiar with Assassin's Creed, it's basically sci-fi, ancient aliens, and alternative history in a melting pot that's produced really interesting and sometimes very underwhelming stories since 2007. 2007? Man, I feel old. Things like experiencing what your ancestors did through a machine called the Animus, Leonardo da Vinci being involved with inventing weapons for the Order of Assassins in their centuries-old war against Knights Templar, a precursor civilization that genetically engineered humanity, but also lives on through a form of possessive reincarnation, and the implication that Hitler was killed by an assassin are such things you encounter in the Assassin's Creed universe. And it's all good fun, don't get me wrong, it can be fun, alternative and conspirational history, mixed with sci-fi, and there are painstaking efforts by the developers in trying to make sure real pieces of history in these games are there for gamers to learn about in the form of architecture, cultures, food, and people. And they work with historians. Fun fact, I know a historian colleague of mine who helped consult on Assassin's Creed Mirage. And another fun fact, Ubisoft was so confident in their historical work that after the Notre Dame Cathedral burnt down in Paris, they actually offered to help with the reconstruction. So yes, there is a respect of what one could deem as proper history in these games, but that respect is also accompanied by the different versions of the famous loading screen that loaded in the first Assassin's Creed, which says, inspired by historical events and characters, this work of fiction was designed, developed, and produced by a multicultural team. So while there is an awesome transmission of historical and cultural lessons through the medium of gaming, Assassin's Creed can also get pretty insane and needlessly over the top in terms of how it tells its story, to the point I personally feel an African man in Japan is the least of my concerns lore-wise. As for why the developers made the creative decision to go with Yasuke as one of the playable characters, when in contrast the previous playable protagonists were basically fictional or somehow related to the region the games were based in, I'm sure a lot of people will look at it in different ways. Personally, I'd venture to say that it was just that, a bold creative decision rather than some nefarious attempt to force black people into gaming or Japanese culture. Here is an incredibly rare instance, for example, of a non-East Asian foreigner in feudal Japan that we don't know much about. He entered the inner circle of the Oda Nobunaga court, and then he just disappears from the pages of recorded history just as things get extremely heated, not only in Japan, but the entire region, to the point that the devastating Imjin War between Ming China, Korea, and Japan commences in 1592. We don't know exactly where Yasuke came from or what his life was like before he was enslaved. We don't know everything that happened with him, and so there's much more creative room for Assassin's Creed to say, okay, here's our formula of alternative history, here's what happened to him, here's how he was secretly a part of the Order of Assassins as we know it, here's what he did behind the scenes, and I think that in itself is classic Assassin's Creed. And of course, when we discuss Yasuke, I feel like a lot of people are just completely forgetting about Naoe, you know, the other protagonist in front of him who is Japanese. So it's not like you only play a black character in a Japanese setting. To be honest with you, my main concerns are, after my review of Assassin's Creed Mirage last year, is if the gameplay experience and mechanics for Shadows are going to be actually good or better streamlined, because gameplay-wise, I haven't been super impressed for a long time by Assassin's Creed. I'm not sure how they're going to implement gameplay mechanics for Yasuke and Naoe, but it just feels like to me maybe they're exploring a character you control for just brawls and fights, while the other character has a more assassination or sneaky playstyle. Furthermore, the price tags that come with Assassin's Creed Shadows are definitely concerning, though I think these are topics for a different video. So why don't we talk more about Yasuke and the historical context in which he was thrust into. At first, a lot of angry people couldn't believe that Yasuke even existed. Well, we know Yasuke existed because he was written about by his contemporaries. He is mentioned in the Shinjo Koki, a set of chronicles and diary entries written by another samurai by the name of Otaguchi, who served under Oda Nobunaga. We can also find brief mentions of Yasuke in the writings of Jesuit missionaries like Louis Fra and Francois Solier, the latter who claims that Yasuke hailed from present-day Mozambique and was brought by the Jesuit missionaries from present-day India to Japan. Yasuke is also mentioned in the diaries of Matsudara Ietada. We even have the recorded encounter and interactions between Oda Nobunaga, known as a great unifier of Japan, and 26 or 27-year-old Yasuke, who's described as a very strong man, like a cow. There's also descriptions of Yasuke's skin being like black ink, which Oda Nobunaga couldn't fathom. And Yasuke was such a sensation that huge crowds would try to look at him, and when Yasuke demonstrated his strength of 10 men by successfully wrestling an opponent, the Jesuits handed over this African man to Nobunaga, who was reportedly a fan of wrestling, and then he was named Yasuke. Additionally, Yasuke is not the only instance of a non-Japanese samurai or bushi in history, nor was he even the only African in Japan at the time. There are documented Ming and Korean samurai like Kim Yo-char. Englishman William Adams is also a notable one for those of you who have read Shogun. There were also a couple of Italian and Dutch samurai recorded in the service of the Hideyoshi court. Once people online accepted the existence of Yasuke, the argument became, okay, he may have existed, but he was no samurai because he wasn't Japanese. He was just a retainer, glorified secretary, or page based on the Googling people were doing. There seems to be a narrow fixation here with a lot of people on foreign versus native, or nobility versus peasant, when it comes to the idea of samurai or bushi or warrior, two concepts which at times intersect or deviate from one another. The main debate seems to not be if Yasuke was a samurai or not, but if he fits what people's idea of a samurai is. The historical fact is that the concept of samurai and the subclasses within the samurai have always been in flux politically and socially depending on the time periods of Japanese history. A lot of the more modern conception of the samurai as a born noble or knight comes from the Edo period from the 17th to 19th centuries, and vestiges of some teachings and ideas from previous eras where the samurai was emerging as both the class and military power that wrested political control from the emperorship. The time period that Yasuke experienced was the time of the Sengoku Jidai, or the Warring States period from the 15th to 16th century. We're talking about one of the most turbulent and violent times in Japanese history. Brother against brother, uncle against nephew, lord against servant, rebellions, wars, battles, social and political upheavals. It was not a peaceful time, and very rarely do social or economic strata remain fixed or stable during such times in human societies. Such was also the case for the samurai class and identity. The biggest example is, of course, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who became the de facto ruler of Japan after his lord Oda Nobunaga was betrayed and killed. Hideyoshi was not born a samurai or into royalty or nobility. He was in fact a peasant, but he became a samurai and daimyo and then imperial regent. Now for Yasuke, we do know from the aforementioned Shinshokoki that Oda Nobunaga granted Yasuke his own residence, his own weapons with a decorative sheath, and a stipend. One of the key things here is that weapons weren't granted to just anyone by a daimyo or lord, and that you were expected to serve at the cost of your life and reputation in their services after receiving such arms. Yasuke did indeed serve in at least one military campaign that we know of under Oda Nobunaga after entering service. Additionally, the word stipend is being used within the specific context of paying retainers, or basically payrolling the samurai in service of Nobunaga and other lords. It's not a word that's used for contractors or simple servants, as a stipend granted to samurai was used mainly for maintaining a military retinue and the land granted to them if any could be granted. In fact, Parallel Pain from the Ask Historian subreddit has a great breakdown of how this word is used in relation to samurai in the pages of the Shincho Koki if you'd like to check these examples out. Lastly, it's also been recorded that Oda Nobunaga entrusted his weapons to Yasuke and made him his weapons bearer, in addition to making him a warrior bodyguard. This isn't some sort of Fallout thing where the Brotherhood of Steel bosses around their squires while giving them a big bag of weapons and ammunition to carry all the time. No, this is a very important gesture within this particular context. It is a complete entrusting of one's life to somebody else. It's not something you hand to a mere secretary or a page or even to a random bodyguard. It also signifies not just how important Yasuke was in the inner circle of Nobunaga's court, but also how much higher ranked he was in relation to others, Japanese or not. So was Yasuke a samurai or type of samurai? Yes. It's hard to dismiss a lot of the historical peripheral evidence surrounding this obscure figure from history, but based on what we do know about other non-Japanese samurai, the cultural context of the period, and of course the eccentricities of Oda Nobunaga, it's a bit foolhardy to claim otherwise. In the end, we don't know what happened to Yasuke. We do know that he fought the Akechi traders during the Honnoji Nohen, or the Honnoji incident, when Oda Nobunaga committed suicide after being betrayed by Akechi Mitsuhide. We do know that Yasuke was captured by said traders and then spared with his wounds being treated by Jesuit missionaries. Louis Fra would write 5 months later, after Yasuke was treated, that Yasuke did not lose his life, and I assume that this may be the part of his life where we explore Yasuke's alternative history sometime in Assassin's Creed Shadow, along with the story of Naoe. I hope you guys enjoyed this bit of gaming and history commentary. I am looking forward to playing Assassin's Creed Shadows. I'm just a little ambivalent about the gameplay itself and other problems that, in my opinion, plague the delivery of the franchise. And I hope it's a bit more of a meaningful open world experience, if it is that, compared to Odyssey or Valhalla. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below, and thank you for watching.